to take your seats as quickly as possible so that we can remain on schedule. We have a great program this entire week, so we're really looking forward to that. Before we begin, though, I just have a couple of quick announcements that I'd like to make. The first is, if you have your passports handy, which you should have picked up when you arrived and checked in, please do your best to visit all of the vendors and get stickers on all of the open circles here, because when you do so, you will get a challenge coin automatically for completing it, and you'll also be enrolled for an even bigger prize by the end of the week. So please get your passport and fill those out. Secondly, if anybody left a pair of sunglasses here last night, we're going to work on the honor system here because I have no other way to do it, right? But please come and see me so I can return those to you. And lastly, I do want to introduce Jake Daly O'Donnell from MITRE to talk about the crossword challenge. Jake?
All right, thank you. So all of you could probably get a flyer in your bag, and if not, you can find one there. But MITRE is running the Cyber Crossword Challenge again this year, and we are raffling off an iPad each day. So please stop by the booth, pick up a challenge, and do your best to fill it out. And if you turn it in by 5:30, you'll be entered into the challenge. And then tomorrow morning, I'll be up here and I'll give away an iPad. And your chances of winning an iPad are probably the best you'll ever have, because it's probably like, 100, 150 or something like that. And if you don't win today, you got 2 more tries, excuse me, to win an iPad. So please give it a shot. Thank you.
With that, we are going to begin in just a few moments. I would ask that you'll remain seated so that we can begin on time. That said, welcome once again. Have a fantastic week, and look forward to meeting as many of you as I can. Thanks.
Peter Mel. Colombia. Peter Mel. Gracias. ¿Tiene una tarjeta también? No, mañana. Okay. Después vamos. Gracias.
para el lanzamiento del juego.
Un poquito retrasada la gente, la general.
It's not that solemn. Oh my gosh. Is our featured guest? Yes, he's here. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to New York. Welcome to this great university, Fordham University. We have, as you can see in front of you, a very special opening speaker this morning, and we'll introduce him in a few seconds. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bill Baker, the President Emeritus of the public TV stations of New York and New Jersey, and the Claudio Acquaviva S.J. Chair Journalist in Residence here at Fordham University, at the Graduate School of Education, I might add. I'm honored today to welcome you to this International Cybersecurity Conference for 2019. And today marks a decade since we first started the ICCS 10 years ago. In 2019 and in subsequent years, Fordham University and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have collaborated on assembling the brightest minds in cybersecurity. This is a very important meeting. One of the brightest minds I know, without question, is the man to my left, and that's the president of this outstanding university. I say that because I have to, but I also say that because I mean it. Father McShane is the president of this university. He's the 32nd president of Fordham University, the Reverend Joseph M. McShane of the Society of Jesus.
Thank you very much, Bill. I always get a kick out of being introduced as the 32nd president. I don't know why, but I'm always introduced as the 32nd. That means I'm Fordham's FDR, which is not true. I hope that doesn't offend you at all. But, welcome. Attorney General Barr, Assistant Director Gorham, Special Agent Maharis, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by welcoming you to Fordham University, the Jesuit university of the capital of the world. As we like to say to people who go to BC, the Boston is the capital of Massachusetts. For those who go to Notre Dame, South Bend is the county seat of St. Joseph County in the state of Indiana. But we here, with all the modesty that we can muster as New Yorkers, say, welcome to Fordham, the Jesuit university of the capital of the world. And so I say that to all of you. As I look out at you, I see that you represent a wide range of industries and institutions brought together by a common interest in cybersecurity. It seems we cannot get through a news cycle without media reports of yet another data breach or cyber attack. Just this past week, for instance, Microsoft announced a significant number of their customers were victims of a cyber attack. In Bulgaria, the financial records of every citizen were exposed to an attack on their tax agency. And in upstate New York, in the city of Syracuse, where I lived for 11 years, the city's educational department came under a ransomware attack. No one, we learned, therefore, is immune. We are all of us vulnerable and dependent on the very important hard work of law enforcement and cybersecurity professionals at each of your home countries, campuses, and institutions. I'm proud to say, and I know that pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. What can I say? Unless it's Fordham pride, in which case it's a virtue. But I won't go there. While I am proud to say that Fordham, along with the FBI, has recognized way back in 2009 the importance of bringing cybersecurity professionals together to focus on a problem that the human family has never faced before, namely cybersecurity. Today, as you heard from Bill, marks a decade of our efforts to bring the world together to consider solutions for the attacks or ways in which the attacks can be addressed. At any given time between the bits and bytes of encoded transmissions, you may be staring at a screen wondering, who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Where is the attack's origin? How best can information be protected? You may even find yourselves holding your hands together in a silent prayer. I recommend that. Asking for the answers, or at least the right IP address. God's IP address is just, hello, help. The human family has made incredible progress. There is no reason we cannot make another great leap in which we can protect the world from the potential dangers within cyberspace. Looking over the registration list, which I do every time we have one of these gatherings, I find it fascinating. And in looking over it this year, I know from my reading that you are the best and the brightest, not only from the United States and not only from the capital of the world, you're the best and brightest in the world. Therefore, I believe that the world is in good hands, wise hands, the hands of honest women and men who are devoted to the good and devoted to the welfare of the human family. I hope that while you're with us, you'll spend some time away from your mobile devices to walk and to explore this great city of ours. This is a city which has over 8.6 million people. There are more than 800 languages spoken here. There are over 20,000 restaurants. Only half of them are Italian. You're a block away from Central Park. You're steps away from Broadway. You're just within really hailing distance of an Uber outside that will take you anywhere in the world's greatest city. Did I mention it's the capital of the world? New York is the heart of many things, including the heart and soul of the world. Walk through the neighborhoods. Learn from our people. We are, I think, the great melting pot. I say this to our entering freshmen. New York is the greatest achievement of the human mind. And I believe it. I really do. And the achievement is made possible by the greatness of our people. We're the mother of immigrants. We're the world's second home. We're your second home. We welcome you, and we want to see you back in the future. God bless you all.
You can see why we're very fortunate to have Father McShane as our leader. Regrettably, Assistant Director Bill Sweeney could not be with us this morning, and in his place, it's my privilege to introduce Special Agent in Charge, Ari Maheras. Ari's a great guy. He joined the FBI in 1990s. Is there something wrong with that? After working in several undercover operations, Special Agent in Charge Maheras moved to the FBI's International Operations Division, which included several deployments overseas. He returned to New York as the supervisor of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, where he led the investigative team responsible for Canada and Africa. In 2015, SAC Maheras was promoted to his current position as Special Agent in Charge of the Counterintelligence and Cyber Divisions. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Ari Maheras.
Well, welcome again, everyone, and thank you so much for attending the 2019 International Conference on Cybersecurity. I'm Ari Maheras, and I oversee the Cyber and Counterintelligence divisions here in the New York field office. Our goal today in bringing everyone together at this forum is to get information out to the public and the private sectors in both the U.S. and internationally about the rapidly changing cyber landscape. This conference can become a force multiplier if you go back to your organizations and spread the word. Soon, everyone outside of this room will understand that the cyber world is going to keep growing, going to get more complex, and through my lens at the FBI, going to get exceedingly more dangerous. Aspects of cyber have become integral parts of all of our lives and now reach every corner of the earth. We have to get ahead of the threat that we face, and the threats are going to get worse with time. And the only way to do that is to inform everyone, not just the industry insiders, but everyone who uses cyber in their lives needs to understand it. We have a great group of presenters and panelists here this year, and the partnerships that we've developed and are fostering with our international counterparts and international agencies are truly remarkable. It cannot be said enough that the cyber world does not operate in a defined space or without geographical borders. It reaches every computer in every home, business, and government in the world. And we know that criminals are not particular about where they venture in cyberspace. Recognizing the global span of our cybersecurity, I would like to extend a huge thank you to all of our international representatives who are here with us this week, and I hope everyone stops someone who is visiting us from overseas to get to know them a little bit more. You will be hearing a lot in the next few days about the threats we see now, as well as some of the ones that we have evidence that will be taking place in the future. And I'm often asked, as are many others in the FBI when we attend these events, what keeps us up at night? Well, with the advent of 5G and the Internet of Things, there are now billions of different ways that the bad actors can interfere in our lives. From a very personal level, such as identity theft, hacking into home computers, and unlocking your front door, to bringing down entire power grids by getting into secure SCADA systems, or even impacting the drinking water coming out of our faucets. I'm actually surprised they get any sleep at all. Ransomware attacks are becoming more and more prevalent, and not to mention more and more destructive. I know many of those attacks have been in the news recently, and Father McShane mentioned some of them. The information that can be compromised and gleaned from institutions like these is scary. Healthcare information, business records and research, city and municipality systems that house unbelievable amounts of information about your house, your taxes, your lives. We have to impress on every person, business, company, even governmental agency that the security of our connection to the world is something you have to invest in. I'm assuming that's not a cyber attack. He's just trying to keep us on our toes. Now, I don't want everyone to think here I'm doomsday planning, because there's certainly no way I can afford property in New York City to build a shelter. So just like almost everyone, I use and have become dependent on all things that are making our lives easier. In fact, I like being able to turn down the thermostat and not moving from my couch as well. But we have to do more to protect the devices and the systems that are so much a part of our lives these days that we don't even realize how connected we truly are. We continue that work here at this conference, and we have to keep doing it to protect what has now become a way of life for all of us. And I have the honor of introducing the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr. William Barr was born in 1950 in New York City. Mr. Barr received his AB in government from Columbia University in 1971 and his MA in government in Chinese studies in 1973. From 1973 to 1977, he served in the Central Intelligence Agency before receiving his JD with highest honors from George Washington University Law School in 1977. Mr. Barr worked in the White House under President Ronald Reagan from 1982 to 1983. Under President George H.W. Bush, Mr. Barr served as the Deputy Attorney General from 1990 to 1991 and became the 77th Attorney General of the United States from 1991 to 1993. While serving at the department, Mr. Barr helped create programs and strategies to reduce violent crime and was responsible for establishing new enforcement policies in a number of areas, including financial institutions, civil rights, antitrust merger guidelines. From 1994 to 2000, Mr. Barr served as Executive Vice President and General Counsel for GTE Corporation, and then served as Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Verizon from 2000 to 2008. On December 7, 2018, President Donald Trump announced his intention to nominate Mr. Barr, who was confirmed as the 85th Attorney General, not the 32nd, the 85th Attorney General of the United States by the U.S. Senate on February 14, 2019. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts administered the oath of office. Mr. Barr joined John Crittenden as one of only 2 people in U.S. history to serve twice as Attorney General. Ladies and gentlemen, the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here this morning, especially those of you who sat on the tarmac waiting to get into New York last night through all the heavy weather. And I'd like to thank particularly Fordham University for hosting this conference and this opening ceremony. And I would like to thank the New York division of the FBI for their work in putting this conference together. As was said, I'm a New Yorker, and it's great to get back to New York. This is my first trip to New York since becoming Attorney General in the Trump administration. In fact, I grew up on the Upper West Side, and then when I came back into New York to work for Verizon, I actually lived right here around Columbus Circle, and one of my daughters, my oldest daughter, Mary, went to Fordham Law School, and then has had a career in the Department of Justice as a narcotics prosecutor for the last 14 years. Now, when I was at Verizon, we were dealing with the issue of new digital switches being deployed and wireless switches being deployed, and the fact that they were not accommodating our law enforcement needs so that we can continue wiretapping with these switches. And I spent a lot of the time when I was at the Department of Justice beating up on the phone companies. And I want you to know, I want to give you an indication of my insights into the technological field and my ability as a prognosticator in this arena. I remember distinctly a meeting we had in the Attorney General's conference room where Jim Kallstrom, who some of you may know, at the time he was assistant director and later became director of public safety in New York. Anyway, Jim was trying to explain to me what he thought, or what the FBI was thinking the trajectory of the wireless industry would be. Now, in those days, you know, our phones, the wireless phones, were like World War II, you know, field phones. And my detail carried around one, which rarely had reception. We had no internet. I mean, this is 29, 30 years ago. So in any event, he was showing me these sketches and artist renditions of what the world would look like, and I vividly remember these little cartoons of businessmen walking down the street like this with a little thing, a personal communicator in their hand, and then there were like these lightning bolts going up to towers, you know, spread out throughout the city. And I was looking at this, and he was explaining why it was so important to get access to these new switches. I said, Jim, that looks very Dick Tracy to me. In any event, it didn't turn out to be Dick Tracy, but that insight was enough to get me hired as the general counsel of Verizon. And I would say over the last 30 years, cyber-related issues, cybersecurity may well be the most significant differences between my first tenure as Attorney General and this one. And I've spent a significant amount of time since February, when I took office, trying to get up to speed on all the developments in this arena. And I've been very impressed and reassured as I've learned about all the investment and the effort that makes the FBI a leader in this sphere. Now, as Ari said, as individuals and as a nation, we've become dependent on a vast and expanding digital infrastructure. That, in turn, has made us vulnerable to cyber criminals and foreign adversaries that target that infrastructure. And that danger cannot be overstated. Enhancing cybersecurity is a national imperative. Among the most critical advances in cybersecurity has been the development of advanced encryption techniques and their deployment in a range of important applications. Encryption provides enormous benefits to society by enabling secure communications, data storage, and online transactions. Because of advances in encryption, we can now better protect our personal information, more securely engage in e-commerce and internet communications, obtain software updates, and limit access to sensitive computers, devices, and networks. As the federal government, we welcome these improvements to privacy and security, and we will work to preserve and strengthen them. But at the same time, we must recognize that our citizens face an array of threats to their safety far broader than just cyber threats, as severe as that threat is. Hackers are a great danger, but so are violent criminals, terrorists, drug traffickers, human traffickers, fraudsters, sexual predators, you name it. While we should not hesitate to deploy encryption to protect ourselves from cyber criminals, this should not be done in a way that eviscerates society's ability to defend itself against all these other types of criminals. In other words, making our virtual world more secure should not come at the expense of making us more vulnerable in the real world. But unfortunately, this is where we appear to be heading. Service providers, device manufacturers, application developers are developing and deploying encryption that can only be decrypted by the end user or customer. And they are refusing to provide technology that allows for lawful access by law enforcement agencies in appropriate circumstances. As a result, law enforcement agencies are increasingly prevented from accessing communications in transit or data stored on cell phones or computers, even with a warrant based on probable cause to believe that criminal activity is underway. Because in the digital age, the bulk of evidence is becoming digital, this form of warrant-proof encryption poses a grave threat to public safety by extinguishing the ability of law enforcement to obtain evidence essential to the detection and investigation of crimes. It allows criminals to operate with impunity, hiding their activities under an impenetrable cloak of secrecy. As you know, some refer to this eclipsing of the government's investigative capabilities as going dark. While encryption protects against cyber attacks, deploying it in warrant-proof form jeopardizes public safety more generally. The net effect is to reduce the overall security of society. I am here today to tell you that as we use encryption to improve cybersecurity, we must also ensure that we retain society's ability to gain lawful access to data and communications when needed to respond to criminal activity. This proposition should not be controversial. It simply reflects the balance struck in the Constitution itself and maintained since the founding. The Fourth Amendment strikes a balance between the individual citizen's interest in conducting certain affairs in private and the general public's interest in subjecting possible criminal activity to investigation. It does so, on the one hand, by securing for each individual a private enclave around his person, house, papers, and effects, a zone bounded by the person's own reasonable expectations of privacy. So long as the individual acts within this zone of privacy, their activities are shielded from unreasonable government investigation. On the other hand, the Fourth Amendment establishes that under certain circumstances, the public has a legitimate need to gain access to the individual's zone of privacy in pursuit of public safety. And it defines the terms under which the government may obtain that access. When the government has probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime is within an individual's zone of privacy, the government is entitled to search and seize the evidence. And the search usually must be preceded by a judicial determination that probable cause exists and be authorized by a warrant. The key point is that the individual's right to privacy and the public right of access are two sides of the same coin. The reason we are able, as part of our basic social compact, to guarantee individuals a certain zone of privacy is precisely because the public has reserved the right to access that zone when public safety requires. If the public right of access is blocked, then these zones of personal privacy are converted into law-free zones, insulated from legitimate scrutiny. Since the founding, advances in technology have disrupted this balance in different ways. Sometimes technology creates new spheres of potential privacy that the drafters of the Fourth Amendment could never have envisioned, such as the advent of the telephone. Sometimes technology gives law enforcement new means to invade privacy that were previously unimaginable, such as thermal imaging technology. And sometimes technology makes it easier for suspects to evade law enforcement, even when there is a lawful basis to investigate, such as the automobile, or, to bring us back to today's topic, encryption. With each of these earlier examples, our society has ensured that the traditional balance between individual privacy and public safety was maintained. This is reflected in the Supreme Court's jurisprudence. In Katz versus the United States, the court held that the Fourth Amendment applied to the government's bugging of a telephone booth, even though this technique did not strictly involve a search of a suspect's person, house, papers, and effects. Decades later in Kylo, the court held that the Fourth Amendment applied to the use of thermal imaging device to look inside a home, even though prior doctrine strongly indicated that government exploitation of light waves emitted from property was outside the scope of Fourth Amendment protections. The Supreme Court's application of Fourth Amendment protections to the attachment of GPS tracking devices to cars in the United States versus Jones had a similar effect. In each of those cases, the court protected privacy against advances in technology. But of course, law enforcement retained the ability to bug a phone booth, to use thermal imaging, or to attach a GPS device if it obtained a warrant. The same script has played out in reverse, with the Supreme Court taking steps to ensure that advances in technology do not unduly tip the scales against public safety by preventing effective law enforcement. A notable example is the automobile. If the zone of privacy was extended to the automobile as a type of personal effect or akin to a mobile house, then it would be difficult, if not impossible, for law enforcement to work within the traditional requirements that police obtain a warrant for a neutral magistrate before conducting a search and seizure. Even when an officer had probable cause to seize a car or its contents, the driver could get away long before the officer could get a warrant. This development threatened again to disrupt that traditional balance between individual privacy and public safety. So what did we do? In a series of decisions that started with Carroll in 1925, the Supreme Court articulated an exception to the traditional war requirement, which allows police to search and seize a car without a warrant, so long as it can later be shown that they had probable cause to support the investigation. In other words, we did not make automobiles a law-free zone. We preserved the constitutional balance by ensuring that law enforcement retained the practical capability to conduct a search when lawfully predicated. The point I hope you take away today is that our societal response to advances in technology that affect the balance between individual privacy and public safety has always been and always should be a two-way street. When the advances tip the scale too far in favor of the government, the response is to expand privacy protections. And when the advances threaten public safety by thwarting effective enforcement, the response should be to preserve lawful access. By enabling dangerous criminals to cloak their communications and activities behind an essentially impenetrable digital shield, the deployment of warrant-proof encryption is already imposing huge costs on society. It seriously degrades the ability of law enforcement to detect and prevent crime before it occurs, and after crimes are committed, it is thwarting law enforcement's ability to identify those responsible or to successfully prosecute the guilty parties. These costs will grow exponentially as deployment of warrant-proof encryption accelerates and criminals are emboldened by their ability to evade detection. At conferences like this, we talk about these costs in abstract terms, but they are not abstract. They're real. The cost of irresponsible encryption that blocks legitimate law enforcement access is ultimately measured in a mounting number of victims, men, women, and children who are the victims of crimes that could have been prevented if law enforcement had been given lawful access to encrypted evidence. Law enforcement has generally not wanted to get into specifics about these cases because details can help sophisticated criminals and terrorists evade detection. But given the frequency with which these situations are now arising, it is only a matter of time before a sensational case crystallizes the issue for the public. Now, FBI Director Wray will be speaking later in the week at this conference and will address some of the damage being inflicted on law enforcement by encryption that blocks lawful access. But for now, I want to make a couple of points about the extent of the damage. Like everybody else, criminals of all stripes increasingly rely on wireless communications, handheld devices, and the internet. This is especially true of larger scale criminal organizations that need to coordinate many conspirators across wide geographical areas. Thus, we have seen transnational drug cartels increasingly move their communications onto commercially available encrypted platforms designed to block lawful access. One of the many examples is a Mexican cartel that recently started trafficking large quantities of finished fentanyl from Asia to Mexico and then into the United States. The cartel started using WhatsApp as their primary communication method, preventing U.S. law enforcement from conducting wiretaps that would have enabled us to locate the fentanyl shipments and seize them at the border. We also found that the cartel had used WhatsApp for the specific purpose of coordinating the murders of Mexican-based police officials. The cartel ended up murdering hundreds of these police officers. Had we been able to gain access to the chat group on a timely basis, we could have saved these lives. So the cost of not being able to gain lawful access in this case were the lives of the assassinated officers, as well as the many lives impacted by unimpeded entry into the United States of huge amounts of deadly fentanyl. This is just one of the countless examples involving the drug war. Indeed, in my view, just the damage done by warrant-proof encryption to our ability to combat drug trafficking is a cost too high for the public to pay. The tsunami of opioids, cocaine, and methamphetamine that started surging into the United States from Mexico in the latter years of the Obama administration is one of the greatest dangers to the well-being of our nation that we face today. In a single year, more Americans die from drug overdoses than we lost in the entire Vietnam War. In addition to this death toll, hundreds of thousands of lives are destroyed. The vast majority of drugs are trafficked into the United States by large, sophisticated, transnational criminal organizations. In past times, when we have had considerable success in combating the cartels like this, the indispensable tool has been communications intelligence, and it remains the indispensable tool today. If our law enforcement agencies do not recover the ability to gain lawful access to encrypted communications and platforms, the prospect of successfully prosecuting the drug war by traditional law enforcement means are dim. Warrant-proof encryption is also seriously impairing our ability to monitor and combat domestic and foreign terrorists. As with drug cartels, we are seeing terrorist organizations moving their communications to encrypted platforms designed to block lawful access. Even smaller terrorist groups and lone wolves have now turned increasingly to encryption. We are seeing more and more as we monitor terrorist communications. Suddenly, in the middle of the communication, when they get into sensitive areas, they switch to an encrypted app, a commercially available encrypted app, in the middle of the conversation, frequently where they are discussing deadly operations. The 2015 terrorist attack in Garland, Texas, still rankles. There, 2 Islamist extremists carried out an attack for which ISIS claimed responsibility. On the morning of the attack, one of the terrorists exchanged approximately 100 instant messages with an overseas terrorist using an encrypted app. To this day, the FBI has still not been able to determine the contents of these messages. The deployment of warrant-proof encryption is seriously diminishing the communications intelligence we are able to collect against foreign and domestic terrorists. Due to the very nature of terrorism, where each actor seeks to inflict high casualties, encryption that allows terrorists to operate beyond the reach of lawful surveillance poses an unacceptable risk to the nation. One further point about the costs imposed on society by warrant-proof encryption. It is not only about the crimes that we are unable to detect and avoid, or the criminals that escape punishment. Converting the internet and communications platforms into a law-free zone, and thus giving criminals the means to operate free of lawful scrutiny, will inevitably propel an expansion of criminal activity. If you remove any possibility that the cops are going to be watching a neighborhood, the criminals already in the neighborhood are going to commit a lot more crimes. The going dark problem is not limited to terrorism or drug cartel cases. While those cases are vitally important, it is also important to law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, who must retain the ability to investigate and prosecute the full spectrum of crimes that plague our society. We are aware, for example, that a large violent gang is using encrypted apps to greenlight assassinations. And yet, because we cannot access the messages, we cannot prevent the murders. We also know that human traffickers and pedophiles use the internet to facilitate their crimes. And yet encryption is already impairing our visibility into some of these activities. With a growing availability of commoditized encryption, it is becoming easier for the most common criminal to communicate beyond the reach of traditional surveillance. And this problem is becoming especially acute for our state and local partners who lack the resources of the federal government and whose ability to investigate and prosecute crimes is being seriously impaired. Now, the department has made clear what we are seeking. We believe that when technology providers deploy encryption in their products, services, and platforms, they need to maintain an appropriate mechanism for lawful access. This means a way for government entities, when they have appropriate legal authority, to access data securely, promptly, and in an intelligible form, whether it is stored on the device or in transmission. We do not seek to prescribe any particular solution. Our private sector technology providers have immensely talented engineers who have built the very products and services that we're talking about. They are in the best position to determine what methods of lawful access work best with their technology. But there has been enough dogmatic pronouncements that lawful access simply cannot be done. It can be and it must be. We are confident that there are technical solutions that will allow lawful access to encrypted data and communications by law enforcement without materially weakening the security provided by encryption. Such encryption regimes already exist. For example, providers design their products to allow access for software updates using centrally managed security keys. We know of no instance where encryption has been defeated by compromise of those provider-maintained keys. Providers have been able to protect them. We think our tech sector has the ingenuity to develop effective ways to provide secure encryption while also providing secure legal access. Some good minds have already started to focus on this, and some promising ideas are emerging. Our colleagues at the United Kingdom's GCHQ have proposed virtual alligator clips, which allow a provider to respond to a warrant by adding a silent law enforcement recipient to an otherwise secure chat. Ray Ozzie has tabled a proposal for exceptional access keys for locked encrypted phones so that they can be unlocked pursuant to a warrant. And Matt Tate has proposed layered cryptographic envelopes to allow lawful access to encrypted data at risk on disks or other storage devices. I am sure that the putative shortcomings of these ideas have been identified, which hopefully will spur further refinements and alternative proposals. And through this dialectic, we can identify a workable solution. I'm not endorsing any particular solution, and we will likely need different approaches for communications and data in transit. But I am suggesting that it is well past time for some in the tech community to abandon the posture that a technical solution is not worth exploring and instead turn their considerable talent to developing products that will reconcile good cybersecurity to the imperative of public safety and national security. As Microsoft's Bill Gates has observed, there's no question of ability. There's a question of willingness. Some object that requiring providers to design their products to allow for lawful access is incompatible with some companies' business models. But what is the business's objective? What is their model? Is it A, to sell encryption that provides the best protection against unauthorized intrusion by bad actors? Or is it B, to sell encryption that assures that law enforcement will not be able to gain lawful access? I hope we can all agree that if the aim is explicitly B, that is, if the purpose is to block lawful access by law enforcement, whether or not this is necessary to achieve the best protection for bad actors, then that is a business model that from society's standpoint is illegitimate. And so is any demand for that product. The product jeopardizes the public safety with no countervailing utility. Few companies would say that this is their objective. On the other hand, it is contended that achieving B, the blocking of lawful access, is essential to achieving A, giving the best protection to bad actors. So, providing for lawful access is collateral damage to the overarching objective of the best protection against bad actors. The argument is that a business is thwarted in its purpose of offering the best possible product unless it can override society's interest in retaining lawful access. Now, some hold this view dogmatically, claiming that it is technologically impossible to provide lawful access without weakening security against unlawful access. But in the world of cybersecurity, we do not deal in absolute guarantees, but in relative risks. All systems fall short of optimality, and have some residual risk of vulnerability, a point which the tech community acknowledges when they are proposing that law enforcement can satisfy its requirements by hacking into the vulnerabilities of their current products. The real question is whether the residual risk of vulnerability, which results from incorporating a lawful access mechanism, is materially greater than those already in the unmodified product. And the department does not believe that this has been demonstrated. Moreover, even if there was, in theory, a slight risk differential, its significance could not be judged solely by the fact that it falls short of some theoretical optimality, particularly with respect to encryption marketed to consumers. The significance of the risk should be assessed based on the practical effect on consumer cybersecurity, as well as its relation to the net risks that offering the product poses to society. After all, we're not talking about protecting the nation's nuclear codes here. Nor are we necessarily talking about the customized encryption used by large business enterprises to protect their operations. We are talking about consumer products and services such as messaging, smartphones, email, and voice and data applications. If one already has an effective level of security, say, by way of illustration, one that protects against 99% of foreseeable threats, is it reasonable to incur massive further costs to move slightly closer to some theoretical optimality and attain, say, 99.5% level of protection, especially when the risk being addressed at that point is highly remote? Here, a company would not invest its own money to gain that kind of incremental benefit. And society should not be asked to pay that cost to accomplish the same purpose. Now, some argue the best way to achieve this slight incremental improvement is worth the cost of imposing those costs on society in the form of degraded public safety. Now, I think this is untenable. Again, using a crude illustration, if the choice is between a world where we can achieve a 99% assurance against cyber threats to consumers while still providing law enforcement 80% of the access that it requires, that's one world. Or a world where we have boosted our cybersecurity to 99.5% for consumers, but at a cost of reducing law enforcement's access to 0%, the choice for society should be clear. Some who resist lawful access complain it places an unreasonable burden on companies who must spend time and resources on developing and implementing a compliance mechanism. To that I say, that's part of being part of civil society. We regularly expect and often mandate, if necessary, that our companies take steps to ensure that their products and services do not impose negative externalities on the public. If my business plan is to sell sawed-off shotguns, that's tough. We as a community have the right to say, no, we don't care if that's your business plan, the barrel has to be this long. Sometimes this requires prohibiting certain products altogether, and other times it requires modification of products so that they are compatible with the public interest. Further, the burden is not as onerous as some make it out to be. I served, as it was said here, for many years as the general counsel of telecommunications companies, GTE and then Verizon. And during my tenure, we dealt with these issues and lived through the passage of CALEA, the Communications Assistance and Law Enforcement Act. Now, the debate we were having that I mentioned at the beginning of my speech about won't companies make their switches, their new switches, available to us in a way that allowed us to conduct the normal Title III interceptions that we had traditionally performed. And that act imposes a statutory duty on telecommunications carriers to maintain the capability to provide lawful access to communications over their facilities. And that has gradually been extended to cable companies and even to voice over internet protocol providers. Companies bear the cost of compliance, but they have flexibility in how to achieve it. And the system has, by and large, worked. It is absurd to think that we would preserve lawful access by mandating that physical telecommunications facilities be accessible to law enforcement for the purpose of obtaining content, while allowing tech providers to block law enforcement from obtaining that very content. The United States is not alone in addressing this issue. In fact, many of our international partners, such as the UK and Australia, are already moving on a statutory framework to address it. American companies have an opportunity to advance their interests by setting industry standards now that can influence the conversation here and worldwide in the years to come. Obviously, the department would like to engage with the private sector in exploring solutions that will provide lawful access. While we remain open to cooperative approaches, the time to achieve them may be limited. Key countries, as I said, including some of our most important allies, have been moving toward legislative and regulatory solutions. I think it is prudent to anticipate that a major incident may well occur at any time that will galvanize public opinion on these issues. Whether we end up with legislation or not, the best course, I think, is for everyone involved to work soberly and in good faith together to craft an appropriate solution, rather than have outcomes dictated during a crisis. As this debate has dragged on and the deployment of warrant-proof encryption has accelerated, our ability to protect the public from criminal and national security threats is rapidly deteriorating. The status quo is exceptionally dangerous. It is unacceptable and only getting worse. The rest of the world has woken up to this threat. It is time for the United States to stop debating whether to address it and start talking about how to address it. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's quite a setup to this important conference. And Attorney General Barr, thank you for your work in supporting the efforts of your agency, the FBI, in this work in cybersecurity. So it was really quite a powerful introductory speech in a great way.